Jesus tells us that God's kingdom is like a mustard seed that is sowed in a garden. It grows and becomes a tree, and birds of the air make nests in its branches. And Jesus said, the kingdom of God is also like yeast that a woman took and mixed with 3 measures of flour until it was all leavened. And this is all that Jesus says. That's the whole of his teachings recorded on that particular day. Just a few sentences. Mustard seeds in a garden and yeast in flour, which doesn't seem like very much to start with when so much needs to be changed. It's clear from what Jesus says that God's kingdom starts small. But from these humble beginnings, consider what can grow. Those of us who were able to gather in Joyce's enrichment class last week had a great discussion about mustard. Mustard seeds are tiny, but they grow aggressively. In fact, mustard easily becomes invasive and covers a whole field that no one intended to be a mustard field. We also discussed that while some mustard plants can grow fairly large, they are far from graceful. It's not quite accurate to describe this as a tree. Mustard at its largest is more accurately described as a shrubbery. It's gangly and scraggly, even when gloriously in bloom. Is that what the kingdom of God is like? Yeast begins even smaller. Yeast are single-cell microorganisms that are part of the fungus kingdom. They can't grow in the same way that seeds do, but they can convert carbohydrates into carbon dioxide and alcohols through fermentation, creating gaseous bubbles in dough so that the dough rises up. Is this what the kingdom of God is like? A one-celled fungus? And consider what the Bible describes is not dried yeast that we might be able to purchase today, but fermented dough. Because when folks made bread in biblical times, they couldn't store yeast the way that we do. So they just kept a piece of dough from the last time that they baked bread, or they borrowed a piece of dough from somewhere else, something like a sourdough starter. The kingdom of God, Jesus says, is like a glob of fermenting dough, which added to 3 measures of flour leavens it all. In case you were wondering, I am always wondering when there's a measurement in the Bible what 3 measures of flour might be. It is 8.5 gallons of flour. That's enough to feed at least 100 people with bread. It's amazing what a little glob of fermented dough can do. People of faith, we often like to compare our God to outrageously big or impressive things. Throughout our scriptures, God is compared to mountains and to oceans, to thunder and to fire. We have built, through the ages, massive cathedrals and composed extraordinary symphonies to try to express God's beauty and majesty. God is all of these amazing things. And Jesus tells us God is also like this. God works in our world from very small beginnings. And God is so powerful that even in the smallest doses, contagious, invasive, persistent. These small beginnings have a massive impact. This is the power of God, not imposed from above, but growing, sprouting, fermenting from within. It's easy to look at the challenges that we face and feel that they are insurmountable. For example, the amount of time, effort, and money it would take to replace the heating system in this building felt so overwhelming to this congregation that it just decided not to do it several times over the years, for as long as folks here can remember, until not doing anything was no longer an option. This is November of 2021. We were just so excited to start getting back together again in person, and the heating system stopped working entirely after years of extensive, expensive repairs, so our bell choir gathered with their winter coats and hats on in the sanctuary. We knew that we needed to do something, and so we began to do it. But then, after lots of research and careful, conscientious decision-making, we learned that the costs of our chosen approach had increased significantly. I'm sorry Steve's not here so I could watch his face while I displayed this for the congregation. I remember there were a few weeks right around Christmas when only a handful of us knew what kind of financial pressures we might be facing in replacing this heating system. It did not feel good. But then we brought the news to more leaders of this congregation, and that meeting changed everything. Because in that meeting, there were a few folks with courage and determination to keep going. These leaders and their words and their memories were like fermented dough, whose presence transforms 3 whole measures of flour so that it all begins to rise together. It is similar, perhaps, to the problem of conservation on a larger scale. Climate change, the devastation of creation, can feel overwhelming and insurmountable. They are enormous problems. But the problems are only truly insurmountable if we face them as individuals. The biggest kinds of changes in politics and policies, changes for our planet, will not happen because of one hero or even one institution. The power of justice and love is planted by God among us like tiny mustard seeds. The power of justice and love is mixed by God among us like fermented dough. It is only through us coming together, our growing and our rising, with the combined gifts of God's grace that have been scattered among us, that a field can be covered and 100 people can be fed, and an environmentally destructive heating system can be replaced, and our earth itself can find new life.